exciting panel titled Stories for the Uniquely You. This session is all about stories that honor personal truths and identities.
We've got an incredible lineup of authors: Lavanya Karthik, Thao Lam, and Yuyi Morales. These authors have created stories that speak deeply to identity, culture, and finding one's place in the world. Lavanya Karthik is an Indian author and illustrator known for imaginative children's books that spark creativity and curiosity in young readers.
Thao Lam is a Vietnamese Canadian author and illustrator celebrated for her unique paper cut illustrations and culturally rich children's stories.
Yuyi Morales is a Mexican American author and illustrator whose award winning books celebrate culture, family, and the immigrant experience beautifully.
It's Yuyi Morales, Arush. Okay. And to top it off, this session will be moderated by the amazing Sandhya Rao, a writer who understands the power of stories to connect us across borders. She has written captivating children's books that blend storytelling with cultural themes and life lessons.
So, Ishan, why do you think that stories about identity are so important, especially for kids?
I think because when we read stories that reflect our own experiences or even experiences that are totally new, it makes us understand more about ourselves. So it shows us that no matter where we come from, our stories matter.
Well said, Ishan. Let's give a warm welcome to all our panelists.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session that we are so excited to present to you. I hope you are all well hydrated and ready to listen to some incredible stories from our three wonderful guests today. All three of them are writers and illustrators. Lavanya is missing her hyphen here, but she is a writer and illustrator as well. I'll start with Thao. Yeah, and I have the same questions for everybody, but just a small little introduction before that, just to place things in context. Over the last day and a little bit more, we've been hearing many people speak about their experiences in children's literature in life. And when we think about it, we realize that all of us are creatures of migration. You know, we've traveled, our ancestors, maybe our parents, our grandparents, maybe even 2-3 centuries ago, people within India have traveled from one part of India to another and settled down. And that is one kind of mixed experience that we have. And we are, I think, all the better for it. Now let's listen to what Yuyi, Thao, and Lavanya have to say about this particular idea of moving from one place to another and what it can do to you, how it can shape your life. Let me show you, to start with Thao, let me show you Thao's book. Incidentally, these books are available for sale in the bookshop. So do take time off to take a look at this. At this distance, you won't be able to see much. But this is Thao's book, The Paper Boat, A Refugee Story. She is of Vietnamese origin, and in this book, she talks about her parents' journey from Vietnam via Malaysia on a boat over 4 days. Eventually, she was 2 years old at the time. Eventually, they found their way to Canada and settled down there. What is special is the story, of course, the story that she shares, but also the way that she shares it, in the visuals that she shares, and the kind of allegorical way she uses another set of visuals that I won't tell you anything about, she will, to tell her story. Thao, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Should I talk about the book or about your question about travel?
You can talk about anything,
Oh,
but yes, one important thing would be why you felt you needed to share this story.
This is a story I grew up with. My parents, as she said, my parents, we escaped from Vietnam and coming to Canada, and I was 2 at the time, and so I don't have a lot of memories or any information about what the war was about or why we escaped. And so every time I asked my parents about, can you tell us why we left Vietnam? They didn't really want to talk about it because it made them sad or it was too complicated to explain to a child. And so my mother would tell me this story about how the ants she rescued when she was a little girl, because in Vietnam, it was sort of, you lived outdoor and the ground was dirt, and so when you put food out, all these ants would come scurrying and like get into your food, and so they would put these bowls of sugar water, and the ants would crawl in there and kind of drown. So this is the story she told, and she said that on the night that we were escaping, they got lost. My mother and myself and my cousin, who was 12 at the time, we got lost, and then she spotted a trail of ants, and she followed these ants, and these ants led her to the riverside where the boat that we were supposed to escape from was waiting for us. So for her, this whole way of explaining war and death and refugees was through karma. She really believed in karma. Like saving those ants when she was a child saved her in return years later. So I thought, for me, that was the most powerful understanding of war and refugees, is the karma you put out is the karma you receive back. So that is why I wrote the paper about, because there's so many stories out there of Vietnam. Like everybody knows the Vietnam War. Everybody knows the history of it. Everybody has a story about how their family escaped. And I was like, I wanted to honor my family story in a way that was very personal. And also, war is such a heavy topic that you don't want to, not that you don't want to write something depressing, but my audience is kids, right? So I want to write a story in which they can fully understand, and it's malleable for them, and also something different, and not bombard them with just facts, right? And so this was my take on the Vietnam War and refugees. As for your question, what does it feel like to move from a different country and restart over, sort of?
Maybe we'll come to that
Oh.
after everybody speaks about it.
Okay.
Yes, Juji, this is for you. By the way, it's Y-I, but it is Juji, right? It's pronounced Juji, Yuyi Morales. She's come from Mexico, but lives in the US. And although we know of so many stories of Mexicans moving into the US in various ways, her story is quite unique in that she came with her little baby to the US for a certain reason, intending to go back home, but found herself becoming a permanent resident of the US. And her son is here, by the way. So, Juji, would you tell us why you wrote your story?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I am born in Mexico, and I immigrated to the United States when I was an adult and I was a new mother. And in the United States, I found a path, and that was that I wanted to tell stories through picture books, which allowed me with my growth that I was having about understanding the language. Like the picture books were the perfect way for me to tell any story. When I had already been an author and an illustrator for some years, people kept asking me if I would tell my story, my immigration story. And I always thought, like, why am I going to say about, like, it's the same thing about, like you mentioned, I make books for children. What is it of my story that will make children interested? Because I came as an adult. And then a couple of things happened. One was that there was a candidate in the United States who started growing his following by making comments about immigrants. by deciding and saying who immigrants were and trying to instill fear in the people of the United States about immigrants. And I was mad. And I really didn't know how to counteract his voice because his voice was powerful. And the only thing that I know what to do is I make children's books. And I thought, okay, maybe my story is not like a Hollywood story. It's not a story that will go into books because I didn't have wolves chasing after me when I crossed the border. I came in an airplane, and I was fortunate enough to get a visa so that I had permission to enter the United States. And yet, I was an immigrant, and I had gone through all the experiences that immigrants go to when they go to a new place and they have to find themselves again, who they are now, who we are in a new place. And I thought I wanted to tell my story because I didn't want someone else to use our stories and say who we were, because that belongs to us. And then the other thing that I remember is I didn't come alone. I came with my son. And my son has his own voice and his own story, and our story is mixed together, but then I had a way that I thought that I could tell that story to children.
Thank you, Juji. Now to come to Lavanya. Lavanya's is, in her book, in her series of books, is a completely different experience. Her books, in a series called Dreamers, talks about certain momentous moments, special moments in some important people's lives that kind of changed their lives, right? Basically, that's the focus. So while both Juji and Thao stories come from experiences that they have gone through, in that sense, the journeys are exterior. Lavanya's series of books reflect interior journeys. So Lavanya, would you like to say something about the series?
Yeah.
I have two, and do you have something else?
No, no. Yeah, well, sure. There are a whole series of these books. There are about 11 so far. And they are about different iconic Indians. There's Satyajit Ray, for instance, or Mahashweta Devi. Also, lesser known people like, there's J.R.D. Tata, the R.K. Narayan and R.K. Lakshman, brothers, but both instrumental in creating the world of Malgudi, and most in the book Swami and Friends. So these are all elements in these books. I also wanted to look at lesser known people. For instance, there is Nek Chand, who in his own way was just following a hobby of his own. He was building a garden, but somehow he became this iconic figure in history. His forbidden garden is now the most famous and sought after landmark in a city that at one time did not allow sculpture of any kind. There is P.C. Sarkar, who is, some people call him a con man, some people just wonder about his, there is his origins are entirely masked in history, but he's self-made and he called himself the world's greatest magician. These are all people that I was very influenced by growing up. I grew up in the age of Doordarshan. And so you will know that we used to watch TV all the time. And that is the chance we got to observe people like P.C. Sarkar's son perform magic, or watch Tijan Bai, an otherwise unknown Dalit woman who has literally created the art form of Pandwani that is now recognized. To come from the most difficult circumstances, to make yourself despite all the odds, and to stand up there in a form. She continues to remain at the age of 65. She is illiterate. She cannot read or write. But when she gets up on a stage, you would think it was a rock performance in a city. It is the tens of thousands of people who flock to her from the heart of India to listen to this completely unique art form. And I wanted to tell these stories rather than the stories of more famous people or people that we recognize in metros, which is how the entire series came to be. I wanted to tell these stories of extremely iconic people who are iconic to me. R.K. Lakshman and R.K. Narayan are, of course, very famous, but one does not hear of the fact that R.K. Narayan was convinced he was a loser. at the age of 16 and 17, he had decided that nobody wanted to read him. He was utterly dejected. And as I was writing these stories, I realized that I was also talking about extremely universal experiences that all children faced. Um, the fear of, performance anxiety or loss or, failure. And as I started developing the series, I realized that I really did not want to talk about these people as adults, because to children, all adults are powerful. Adults are capable of doing anything. There is no great mystery there. But to be able to tell the story of someone like J.R.D. Tata or Mahashweta Devi as a child, at once creates a connect for a young reader. You are able to identify with universal feelings like fear, or feeling helpless or powerless, feeling or just being all alone with your imagination and discovering what is going to be your career in cinema. So I wanted to find these incidents about each person that is pivotal to their journeys, which begins their journey towards the greatness that they would go on to achieve. So they are internal, as you said, they are about internal journeys, each book, focusing entirely on the childhoods of the people that I'm talking about. I answered the question.
I think people would have understood what you're trying to say. But I do have another kind of question for you, but I shall hold the thought and come to Thao before that, to both Thao and Juji. The idea, since both your stories are, I don't like to call them migration stories, but they are journeys from one point to another. So, and they are journeys from one home to another. So I would like both of you to reflect on the idea of home, You leave a home, you find a home. How do you make that home? And what helps you make that home your home? Thao?
I move a lot. I move like I'm averaging about every 5 years I move. And for me, home, I mean, the easiest question is home is where the family is, right? Or home is where your heart is. But I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, especially like from my personal experience, my family and I have difficulties like sharing our feelings and our thoughts, a lot of baggage there. And so for me, I like home where the family is not, doesn't really sit well with me. But I was thinking about your question earlier on, and I was like moving from one country to another, and how you said like a lot of people from India has moved several countries, but still call India their home. And even the folks I've met over the last couple of days, like the amount of countries some of these people I've met are like, they've moved like 5 different countries. And so like how do you, like for me, I have a really hard time saying that Vietnam is my home, right? Because I was born there, but I left when I was 2. And so I'm like, well, like I have no memories of it. I don't speak the language very well. I can't read or write in Vietnamese. So how do I call Vietnam my home, right? And so when I speak to other Vietnamese people, I feel so out of place. I feel like a foreigner. But then I can't call Canada my home, because when people go, oh, every time they see me, like in Canada, they're like, where are you from, right? There's no assumption that I'm from Canada, which I'm not, because I was born in Saigon. But or they listen to me talk and they're like, oh man, your English is so good. I thought you would have an accent or something. So it's kind of like I'm straddling, like I don't have a home. And even when I was writing this book, or the film version of this book, I have a hard time saying that this is my story, right? Because I say, I don't have any memories of it. How do I claim this as my story? I did a lot of research and read a lot of stories about refugees, and everybody has their own their story of this, or their journey. But I feel like an imposter. Like I feel like I can't claim I'm a refugee. I have no memory of it, right? And therefore I have no hardship. I don't feel like I have earned it. And so I have a difficult time figuring where my home is, and also what rights do I have to claim either country as my home.
Thao actually gives us a lot of things to think about, you know, all the things, all the points she has raised. I don't want to talk about them now because I don't want to take up the time, but I would urge you all to reflect on the things that she has said. Juji, would you like to?
You mentioned a moment ago that I was born in Mexico, then I moved to the United States, but I also moved back to Mexico a few years ago because that was always my dream. My dream was, like, you know, when the people talk about the American dream, and my American dream was always together with the Mexican dream, with the fact that I could go back to my country. So I have done that now. And what I find in these migrations that I have created for myself is that my heart as an immigrant is forever divided. It's never in one place. Like, I live in Mexico, but my son has to stay in the United States. So a very important part of my heart is back there, and it will never be a wholesome one just by being in one single space. And I think that for me, the answer about where I feel at home has a lot to do with the place where I feel most creative, and also the place where I feel the most connection to people. So once I started building my community and being part of my community, then home came. When it was in the United States, for years and years, I didn't really have friends, and I have a hard time being part of groups because whether I didn't speak the language, or later because I met people who also spoke Spanish, but then we had schedules like the ones that people have in the United States, where there is very little time to socialize, and you have to put it in your agenda if you want to meet someone, and maybe in 3 weeks there will be an opening for you to do it. That made it hard for me to create that sense of community. But I think that the answer always lies there. Like, your heart is where you can create. And what's the best thing that you can create is that connection with other people, and realize the things that we have in common, the things that we can work together for. And one of those things is making ourselves at home, is having family. Like, yes, my family, like what you were saying, Thao, like, maybe family wasn't the place that gave you home, even though family is important. But also, what is the family that we create once we move to new places? That is what make home for everybody, at least for me.
A different perspective, but something that I'm sure many can relate to. And the point about a place where you can be creative, where you can be yourself, where you are familiar with things. Very, very important points you make, Juji. And I think a lot of, just to put it in perspective, in many Indian families, have children who live very far away in many different countries. And those children often say the families they have are their friends, because very often they don't have blood relatives, but they have friends, and they make their families and they make their homes. Lavanya, for you, I have a slightly different question. Since you have spoken about certain pivotal incidents in the lives of the people you've talked about, how did you get into the minds and into the spirit of those individuals, because you're so much younger than they are?
Essentially reading up everything I could about them to, I think, to find the voice that I wanted to tell each story in. Because some of these are in, the third person, but a lot of them are in first person. I'm trying to voice the story, by being, for instance, if it's R.K. Narayan, he tells the story himself, in the book. And I wanted to capture that essence of what they felt like perhaps at that time and place in their lives. In his case, I read pretty much all his books. I read his biography. And what you get is this wry, self-deprecating voice that is very uniquely Arkin-Narayan. This inability to see anything good in himself or in the people around him, managing to be both self-centered, self-pitying, as well as having a very compassionate eye for the city he lived in. And I think that's how the story evolved for me. It was about this boy who is at the depths of despair. It's literally a journey because he is wandering all over the town of Mysore, and he manages. This is a true story, by the way. It's actually a single line in his memoir. It's about this time that he walks all the way up to the top of the Chamundi temple, which is outside the city, and it's about 1,000 steps. So he has wandered. He's really upset. He's worrying about his future. He is convinced that he's never going to be the great writer he thinks he's born to be. And he wanders, reaches the first step, wanders all the way up. And this being 1930, there was like zero security. So he manages to climb up the series of ladders which are fixed to the wall to go all the way to the top of the temple, the Gopuram, the very top of the tower. And it is there that there is this epiphany. You get a sense of it in his writing when he says that he looks at the city is what is most, he treasures being in Mysore. There's every aspect of it, the people that he meets. He loves it. Yet he feels that his writing should be somehow global. He should reflect he should be like Shakespeare in the scope and drama that he writes about. He should be, readers across the world should be able to see his genius, which of course is not happening. And when he's standing up there is something about being in Mysore that slowly begins his journey of self-discovery, that perhaps he is meant to write about the things that matter to him. That if it is Mysore that he loves, he needs to look at the minute details that are so precious to him. So if you read all his books, they are about really small people. They're about a guide. They're about a kid called Swami and his antics on a playfield. And yet somehow these stories become so universal. He is still so fresh when you read his work today. And that journey really begins for him at the age of 17 when he wrote this book. So I think those are the ways I have once again meandered away from your question, sorry. But those are the aspects I wanted to create.
So you'll have to look at her books yourself to figure out all the others. An interesting thing that came up, and which I think is very relevant to the Neve Lit Fest anyway, is the fact of books and reading. In fact, in the note at the back of Juji's book, she writes, in the story, she tells you how going to a library and a librarian giving them books helps her and her baby slowly discover a completely new world and helps them find their feet. She says, one day Kelly's grandmother brought us to a building that would change our lives forever. We discovered the public library, and it was spectacular in capital letters. I had never been in a place where you could just take books from the shelves without asking and without being scolded for taking them. And there were picture books, something I had not encountered before. I could not believe how beautiful and sturdy they were. And then when I opened them, I was amazed at the power of their illustrations. And we get a sense of this when looking at Thao's book as well as, of course, Lavanya's book. So since they are all three illustrators as well, I would like them to share with you some of their thoughts on illustrating. Reading on the one hand, discovering books on the one hand, and illustrating. Juji, would you like to start?
For me, illustrating and illustrations in picture books were exactly the entry to the world of both, like being able to understand the books that I was seeing in front of me. Then being able to see myself in some of the books that I found. Then being able to imagine myself in the path of the books and not only being the reader, but could I be the creator? Could I be the writer? Could I be the illustrator? And it was because the illustrations have this power of, even if you don't understand the language, which is what happened to me, when I opened up some of those first picture books that I saw, is, yes, I did not understand most of the words that were in the books, even though I had been watching Sesame Street. Do you know Sesame Street? And Sesame Street, I had learned a few words in English, and so I was able to figure out some things, but not really the stories. And it was until I saw the pictures that I could put together what was happening in the stories. Pictures are important because they are a way of saying things, they are a language. Now, the truth is that in picture books, there are many languages that are working there. Even the way that you pass the page and look at the next image, the colors tell you things, the shapes, the size of the illustrations that you saw, they are all part of the narrative. They all tell you stories. The placement of the words, sometimes there are no words. What is true for picture books, at least for me, is that they are magical and marvelous because they have many ways of speaking to you. And if you are thinking of making picture books, just imagine yourself being able to use many different ways of saying something. You can make illustrations with any part of your body and any part of your brain and any part of your heart. You don't need to be a good person, like a good artist. You don't need to be a good at drawing or painting. You just need to have that impetus, that desire of tell the story and put it in the pages of a book and see what comes. See what's your strength, what is the thing that pulls you and tells you, yes, this is how you want to say it. Perhaps it's just a dot or a splash of color, or perhaps it's just emptiness on this page. But you will find your own way of telling your stories.
I would also like you to comment on how you use different materials in creating your pictures. Just
Thank you. I blame it on that I never studied art. I always liked drawing, but when I was growing up, I didn't have art materials. And it wasn't until I got to the United States and I saw picture books that I wanted to make. I wanted to emulate and recreate the things that I saw. And I always think that because art was not something that I was good at or I could hold on to, then I was free to choose and experiment with anything that I did. So I bought my first set of paints and I chose acrylics and I painted on paper and I used the picture books that I admire to copy my own illustrations and try to imagine how they did it and see if I could do it in the same way. So I forgot now your question, but about the possibility of pictures.
Yeah, in fact, you will find little bits of photographs of little bits of embroidery, the floor of her kitchen, a picture of something else, and pictures of the books that she and Kelly looked at. In fact, she gives you a whole list of the books that you will find in the book, which is quite exciting. Even for me, I found it very exciting to look at that list and then look at the pictures of those books in the picture book. Uh, Thao, the same question for you, but in the context of, one thing I would like to say is there's very little text in Juji's book. She was talking about the stories that pictures tell. And there is no text at all in Thao's book. It's a wordless book. So, and her book is called The Paper Boat. So taking off from the title of your book, The Paper Boat, would you like to tell us something about your approach?
Yeah, like for me, your description, description at the back of the book about like entering the library for the first time and realizing that you can borrow books and that you have access to like everything that is in that building and you can take it without having to pay for it, is an empowering experience, I think, for mostly immigrants that are new to the country. And for me, picture books was a great introduction to storytelling because I wasn't able to read yet. And so I would look at the pictures inside the books and I would make up my own stories. So that was, though I didn't know it at the time, that was what I was doing. I was making wordless picture books in my head. And that is why I was always fascinated with wordless picture books, because it gave you access to a story even though you didn't understand the language or the culture. So when I made the paper boat, I intentionally left the words out because I really wanted a version of me that was arriving to Canada to be able to pick up a book and say, oh, I totally understand her story. I experienced it myself too. And actually, the paper boat was picked up by, there is a silent, or they call it silent books, but it's like a wordless picture book library off the coast of Italy, because they set up that library there because they were getting an influx of refugees. And so they wanted to give refugees a place so that they can escape from the horrors of their journey and to relax and learn. And so they have a whole collection there of wordless picture books. And I was really touched that the paper boat got selected to be in it, because to me that was exactly why I created this book, right? Is to give a voice to people who are new to a country.
Actually, Thao, what you say, kind of perfectly explains what Juji was saying about the power of pictures and the fact that wordless picture books can be read by anybody. You don't need to know the alphabet of any language. It is just the language of pictures.
We've been doing it for quite a long time, like wordless storytelling, right? Like if you look at cave paintings, that was like the first wordless picture books. Like in my last couple of days, we've been, the festival has set up some tours for us. So we went to a temple and we went to a palace, and the walls on these places were all wordless picture books. They told either stories of a religion or stories of a war. You guys been doing it for years. It's just nobody's actually put two and two together, right? And so that's the power of images.
Lavanya?
In fact, because your book, there's a lot of material and texture in both of your books. And I also noticed that because it is wordless, one automatically looks that much closer. You start to notice so much more detail, the texture, the layers of paper. I think that's a very powerful way of telling a story too, because you're going that much deeper. You look at every shadow, because in trying to read detail, you see new things which you might not if there were words. So I feel, again, when there is so, with your book, I felt that with all the layers of paper, and it was very effective.
No, and in the way that the illustrations, I am drawing a lot of attention to the illustrations as well, because I feel they are such an important part of one's identity. And in the way that they have approached these illustrations, it also is a journey in itself, right, in creating this. And Lavanya, I'd like you to talk about the way you have approached illustrations in your books.
In fact, as you were talking, I was just, because I have, what I've done is, with each book, I've tried to use a different art style, either a folk tradition or a more classical form of art like miniature painting, which is somehow relevant to the subject of each book. So, for instance, there is Mughal miniature art for Dr. Salim Ali, who was an ornithologist, and birds are very central to Mughal art. I used the art of R.K. Lakshman when I was in the book about him. And I realized as I was talking that perhaps that art is the sense of home for each of my books, because we are talking of, because that is what grounds each of my subjects to perhaps the region that they come from, or something that they feel very close to, be it birds or, in the case of Mahashweta Devi, it is communism. She was a communist, and the art style used is the art of Chittaprasad Bhattacharya, who was he was a very powerful art. His art is very powerful. When he is perhaps among the first to draw about the Bengal famine, the effects of oppression, starvation on the people of Bengal, and I try to use some of those elements in the book I made about him. So I feel art, that is kind of a silent layer in my book, because while I'm telling the story, the art is doing its own thing at the back. Sometimes it influences the way I tell the story. For instance, I have a book about Bachendri Pal, who was the first Indian woman to climb the Mount Everest. And rather than tell a very conventional story about how she went up the mountain and she and her friends, they were stranded, and they had all these children. They're all children between the ages of 12 and 15. They were stranded on that mountain for a whole night. And then in the morning, they came all the way down, which in itself is a story, but I decided to look at Tanka art, which comes from the Himalayan region. And what you see in the art is, apart from the elements that I've used, is also the presence of demons. There are demons, there are gods. And when you look closer at Buddhist iconography at the Himalayan region, you realize that the mountains are gods. So when I wrote my story, this became a story about these children defying rules and going up a hill and encountering demons. Demons called thirst or cold, sickness, fear. And it's about conquering demons, and which also works its way into the illustrations. But the children are able to see that I'm not talking about literal demons or literal monsters. They're talking about these emotions that this group of children managed to go through and find their way and deal with. So I found that the art of each region somehow informs my stories and just grounds each one in a very individual way.
So 3 people, 3 different ways, yet there's something that links all of that. One last question before we throw the floor open to questions from... What has been the reaction from children when you share these books with them? We'd be curious to know. How have children reacted? Because they react without any filters. And they come up with some interesting observations. Does anything come to mind?
I think most people are always, kids are mostly curious about the art, how I make it. I've actually got a lot of replies from parents, mostly parents of immigrants. And they send me notes or email me and say, oh, what you wrote is exactly what my family went through. And to me, that really was touching, because these are parents who are the same age as they had the same experience, and therefore they kind of understand what I was going through, and also balancing both their old country and their new country. So that for me was what touched me most. And then it was like a lot of these parents were like, yeah, this was a great opportunity for me to talk to my child about how I came to the US or how I came to Canada. And they said it was an opening for them to have a conversation.
Yeah, it's very similar. Like, I realized that maybe Dreamers is a book that makes a connection with the parents and the caretakers of children. I imagine that it's a book that is read by parents to their children, and maybe they put them on their laps, or they sit next together. Because they have told me, I have heard from many parents that say, finally I have a book that I can share with my child so that they understand what I have been through, what my experience has been. And once I went to San Francisco and I was presenting, and at the end of my presentation, a young woman came and she said, I didn't know that there was a presentation. I came here because I come every day with my son. We are homeless. And I am the mother of your book. I am that person that comes with her child every day to the library and has found a home here. What, I mean, what more than that?
Thank you very much, authors. So, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Hi, this question's for Juji and Thao. Thank you so much for your answers. As you were talking about the sense of home and talked about being in different countries, and your last statement especially about them recognizing themselves in the mother, wanted to also ask you if that sense of identity that we have as people changes with these shared spaces that we have across multiple countries, and how has that both shaped for you personally, but also the books that you write, right? The sense of who I am, what is my identity, does that sort of also get influenced because of your shared spaces across multiple countries and how that reflected in your books?
Thank you. And then I'm thinking about how, like, when I was living in the United States, I will go to Mexico and they will say, "Where are you from?" And then I will go to the United States and they will say, "Where are you from?" It's like, yes, your identity is always reshaping you. I mean, your experience makes you someone who you were never before. And I think that that is a beautiful way because we are always in transformation. So I think I feel open to, like, let's see what happens now. Let's see what kind of person you are now. And at least for me, when I'm making a book, I am always writing about my own questions, about my experiences. And I think about books like the way we dream. When we dream, we are the creators of our dreams. And they say that our dreams take something from when we were children, and then they take something from that we are experiencing right now, and we put it together, and then we create a dream. I think that books, at least for me, they are also like that. I'm sure that it's like that for a lot of people. You take something that you experienced when you were a child with something that you have learned, that you know, that you are questioning at this moment, you put it together, and a story and a new book is created. My books are a reflection of the things that I'm asking right now, I'm experiencing. Maybe I don't know about that, but then I want to know more, and a book brings me into that journey of researching, of creating art, of trying to say things with new abilities, new talents, things that I have learned to do right now. So I think that a book is always a good place to grow and to reflect who you are at this moment. And in the same way, that book that you wrote right now will not be the book that you will write tomorrow. And so maybe some of those books that were part of who we were earlier, it is okay if we put them to sleep now, because we will always be creating new stories according to who we are at every moment. Thank you for your question.
I think I agree with what you said. Like for me, writing each book is my opportunity to solve a problem or a thought that I am working through. And then it's an opportunity for me to research on that topic. I am a big fan of researching. It's a great way to procrastinate. So all my stories have personal experiences or something I'm struggling with and trying to figure out. And I agree, like you are your experiences. Your stories are based on your experiences. It's easier to write a story when it's based on your experiences and it's the most sincere way to write, right? So whether the experience is something joyful or a hardship, like I embrace everything. No matter at what point in my life, my ups and downs, embrace it all and store it. Like as a writer, that is valuable resources. Like the pain that you are feeling, take that, right? Writing helps you process that thoughts. I can, like each book is a moment in time in which I was struggling with something, right? And that helped me either meditate or processed or distract me from what was going on my outside world. So am I going off topic? Okay, I'm done.
Why do you think the world is turning, or the countries you live in are turning against migration? And do you think that's because there's been too much of it, or are people scared? And do you think this is like a passing shower, or is it climate change for migration?
I think that right now migration is forced migration. And hopefully one day it won't be. Hopefully one day we will migrate because we fall in love with someone, because we want to open up our world, or because we want to share our home and our world to others. Right now, that is hardly the reason why we migrate. We usually migrate because we have a need to. But I don't think it's going to change. You know, like, we are not the only ones who migrate. Animals have been migrating forever and ever, for generations. And when I researched, like, why do animals migrate, I found out that there was not a clear answer. But what is true is that it is a way to survive. Like, why will an animal who is born in a place where it's warm will migrate to a place that is colder? And it might be that in the place where it's born, even though it's nice and warm, there might be a lot of competition for finding food. Or they might be more prey, and if they need to reproduce and have their babies, they will look for other places that are safer. I believe that migration is natural. And what is not natural is the fear that we have for migrating people and migrating beings. And so then if it is not natural, perhaps our answers and the way that we are going to fix or combat or heal that is going to be a way that we are going to have to create. Because if we just let ourselves go, then we will naturally accept migration. So if we have created migration as a problem, then we are going to have to find out why people and why beings are migrating, and whether we need to stop that or perhaps not. Perhaps what we need to do is to create the conditions in the places where we are at, so that nobody has to migrate unless they want to know the world.
Hi, thanks for a lovely panel discussion. My question is, what would your advice be for aspiring children writers as well as lazy adult writers, especially about connecting with your unique voice and who you are?
I get that question a lot. I find like every time I introduce myself to people and they go, like, what do you do? I write children's books. I have a story. I've been held up in customs because the custom officer's like, oh, I got lots of stories for you. My advice is just to write. The thing that holds up people from publishing a story, other than the publisher themselves, is submitting something, putting it down on paper, right? Just like Nike, trademarked, just do it, right? That is my advice. Just do it. Don't ask me questions about it. Just do it.
I would say, well, firstly, are you enjoying it? If you're enjoying it, it ceases to be work. And that makes the process easier. Write what you want to read. I think don't write for an imagined audience. Write for you. I think that always works. And of course, I mean, read everything you can, not concerning whatever you're writing. I think just read in the circular manner, everything that interests you, even new things that you don't even know you're interested in yet. Just read everything you can. Read widely, enjoy, and of course, practice a lot. Practice writing, which means sometimes it's difficult, but you keep writing. And like with everything, like with learning a new skill or running or swimming, there is going to be a very large part where you're very bad at it, which is fine. So all you can do is practice till you've crossed that and things get better. So that's it.
You know, I have found that, at least for me, there are like two stages in writing. And there is one where there is something inside of you that just wants to get out. You might not know how, but it wants to get out. And I try to let myself be very gentle with myself in that stage and not be critical at all. Just accept whatever comes out. Because later, there will be a time where you have to be more critic and say, oh, is this going to be understood by others? Is my grandma correct or is not? But that's a stage that comes after the story has come out of you. So be gentle with yourself in those first times, those first moments where the story is just peeking out, and then be really like tough when the story is on your plate, is right in front of you, to make it the best story that you can.
Thank you very much, authors. What a way to end this session. Can you please have a big round of applause?